credit report arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I was eating cereal over the sink, still in my scrubs, too tired to sit down after a 12-hour shift. I'd requested it 3 weeks earlier, just routine, I told myself. I was thinking about buying a car, nothing serious. I set the envelope on the counter and finished my cereal. Then I opened it. I had to read the first page twice. There was a personal loan on my credit history. $47,000. Opened 14 months ago. The lender was a regional bank 2 states away from where I live. The address on the application was my childhood home. I hadn't applied for any loan. I stood there in my kitchen with the papers in my hand and the spoon still in the bowl, and I thought, very clearly, something is wrong. Not the dramatic, heart-pounding kind of wrong you see in movies, just the quiet, cold kind. The kind that settles into your chest like you swallowed something heavy and it hasn't moved yet. My name is Sloane. I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse. I share an apartment with my cat and a dying succulent. I keep forgetting to water. I have a 401k I barely contribute to and a student loan I've been chipping away at for 6 years, and I have never, not once, taken out a personal loan for $47,000. But apparently, someone had done it for me. Let me back up, because this story doesn't start with the credit report. It starts earlier than that, much earlier, if I'm honest. It starts with the kind of family dynamic that takes years to recognize for what it actually is. I'm the oldest of 3. My brother is 4 years younger than me, and my sister is 7 years younger. Growing up, my parents worked hard. My father drove trucks long distance, gone most of the week. My mother managed the household, which mostly meant managing us, which mostly meant managing me. I was the responsible one, the reliable one. The one who got good grades and didn't cause trouble and helped with homework and didn't ask for much. I thought that was just who I was. It took me until my late 20s to understand it was also a role that had been assigned to me. My brother, I'll just call him my brother, was different. He was charming and funny and a little reckless in ways my parents found endearing. He dropped out of his first college, transferred, dropped out again. My parents paid for all of it without complaint. He moved back home at 24. They didn't charge rent. He started a business that went nowhere. They funded it. He borrowed money and repaid it slowly, partially, and sometimes not at all. My mother would reference these debts occasionally, then walk them back, then reference them again. It was a cycle. I learned not to comment on it. I left home at 18 for nursing school, scholarships and loans and 2 part-time jobs. I sent money home when I could, which I now recognize I should not have done, but that's a different therapy session. The point is that I built my life myself, and I was quietly, genuinely proud of that. I owned my choices, I carried my debt. It was mine. I visited home for holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the occasional birthday. The visits were fine, mostly. My mother cooked, my father fell asleep in front of the game, my brother and sister and I circled each other with the careful politeness of people who love each other in theory and struggle with it in practice. I always drove home feeling a little lighter when I left. I never examined that feeling too closely. Then my brother got engaged. Her name is Tanya. That I'll share, because she matters. She's fine. She's perfectly nice. She and my brother had been together 3 years, and the engagement surprised no one except possibly my brother, who seemed genuinely startled that he'd arrived at this point in his life. There was a party. There were toasts. My mother cried. My father shook his hand. I hugged them both and said congratulations and meant it. The wedding planning started immediately. I should tell you, I had no idea what any of it was going to cost. That is my honest answer. I am not someone who thinks about weddings. I was not planning one. I had no frame of reference. When my mother mentioned early on that they were looking at venues and that venues in our area were expensive, I nodded and made a sympathetic sound and moved on. I assumed they were handling it. It was not my wedding. The first time money came up in a way that felt directed at me. It was framed as a question. I was home for a long weekend in April, about 5 months after the engagement. We were eating dinner, pasta, garlic bread, the green salad my mother makes with the Italian dressing from the bottle. My father was telling a story about someone from work. My brother was on his phone. My mother waited until there was a pause, and then she looked at me and she said very casually, "We've been thinking about asking you to help with some of the wedding costs." I put my fork down. "Just as long," she said quickly, "you'd be paid back." I asked her what she meant by some. She said they were still working out the numbers. I told her I'd think about it. I said it politely and I meant it sincerely, and I thought about it for several weeks and decided that I was not in a position to loan a significant amount of money to my family for a wedding. I had my own financial goals. I was saving for a down payment on a place of my own. A loan with no clear terms or timeline felt like a gift with extra steps. I had watched my parents forgive my brother's debts enough times to know how "you'll be paid back" worked in our family. I called my mother and told her no. Gently. I explained my reasoning. I said I loved them and I was excited for the wedding and I would contribute what I could as a gift. But I couldn't take on a loan arrangement. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Okay, I understand." I believed her. The wedding was in October. It was at a vineyard venue about 90 minutes from my parents' house. It was beautiful, genuinely. String lights and wooden tables and a band that played until 10 and a menu with 3 choices of entree. I wore the dress I'd bought, danced with my sister, drank 2 glasses of wine and drove back to the hotel feeling like the evening had gone well. I didn't see the bill. It didn't occur to me to ask about it. Why would it? And then, 6 months later, I was standing in my kitchen in my scrubs reading a credit report. $47,000. Regional bank 2 states away. Address of record my childhood home. Date of application 11 months before the wedding. My name. My social security number. My signature. Or something that looked enough like it to pass. I called the bank the next morning. I sat on hold for 22 minutes and then spoke to a woman in their fraud department named, I want to be accurate, a representative who was professional and careful and asked me a series of questions. Had I applied for the loan? No. Had I authorized anyone to apply on my behalf? No. Did I recognize the lender or the branch? No. She told me to file a written dispute and send it certified mail and to file a report with the FTC and with the credit bureaus and to contact local law enforcement if I believed the crime had been committed. I asked her if she thought a crime had been committed. She said she wasn't able to advise me on that, but she was sorry this was happening to me. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on my couch with my cat on my lap, and I stayed very still for a while. Here's the thing about finding out your family has done something like this to you. The first feeling isn't anger. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect anger and I understand why, but it wasn't the first thing. The first thing was grief. A clean, cold grief, like a window breaking inward. Because I knew. Before I called anyone, before I confronted anyone, I already knew. The child at home address, the timing, the fact that they needed money, and I had said no. I knew, and knowing meant something was over, that I hadn't been ready to be over. I called my sister first. She's 7 years younger than me. She was 24. She was living with a roommate in a city 4 hours away and working at a nonprofit and trying to figure out her life. I trusted her. I still trust her. She picked up on the second ring, and I told her what I'd found, and she was silent for a long time, and then she said, "Sloane." Oh no. She didn't know. I could hear it. The tone of someone who is genuinely, viscerally upset on your behalf, not the tone of someone scrambling. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I wasn't sure yet. She said, "Call a lawyer before you call Mom, please." I wrote that down. I still have that note. I called a lawyer that afternoon, a woman who specialized in consumer protection and fraud. I left a message. She called me back the next day, asked me to describe the situation, and said very calmly, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." She told me to gather documentation, the credit report, the dispute letters, anything I had in writing, and not to confront my parents directly until we had a clearer picture of the loan details. She said family financial fraud is more common than people realize, and that my instinct to address it through proper channels first was correct. I want to pause on that word, fraud. I hadn't used it myself yet. Hearing her say it out loud did something to me. It named it. It made it real in a different way than the paper in my hand had made it real. I got the documentation together. I filed the FTC report. I sent the dispute letters certified mail. And then I waited a week. And then I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning, and I sat down at the kitchen table with my mother, and my father and I put the credit report in front of them. My mother looked at it for a long moment. My father didn't move. I said, "I need you to tell me about this." My mother started to cry, not slowly, immediately, like she'd been holding it, and the sight of the paper released it. She said she was sorry. She said they hadn't known what else to do. She said the venue had required a deposit they hadn't anticipated, and the catering had gone over budget, and they had tried to take out a loan themselves, but were denied. And she said, and this is the part I've had to sit with the most, she said, "We knew you would have said no." Yes, I would have. "So we didn't ask," she said. I looked at my father. He was looking at the table. I asked who had signed my name. Neither of them answered. I asked again. My mother said she didn't want to get into the details right now. I told her that the details were already filed with the FTC and a fraud dispute was already in process with the bank, and the details were going to come out regardless. My father said we were going to pay it back. I told him that wasn't how this worked. My mother's tone shifted then. It was subtle, like a current changing direction. She said I was making this into something bigger than it needed to be. She said it was family. She said that her son's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and that I had the means to help and I had refused to, and now I was going to involve lawyers and banks and make it a whole, she paused, looking for a word, a whole ordeal. I said you opened a loan in my name without my knowledge or consent. She said you left us no choice. That sentence. I've turned it over many times since. The architecture of it. The way it positions their decision as something I caused, something I forced, something that was only happening because of my failure to cooperate. It's almost elegant in a horrible way. I left them no choice. My brother was not at the house that morning. I found out later that my mother had asked him not to be there. He texted me that afternoon, "Hey, I heard. I'm really sorry this happened." I didn't know about the loan. I haven't been able to determine whether that's true. I've chosen not to spend too much energy trying to figure it out. The wedding happened. The money was spent. Whether he knew the mechanism of funding or not, he cashed the result. The following weeks were a process. The bank's fraud department conducted an investigation. My lawyer communicated with them on my behalf. My credit report was flagged. The dispute moved through channels the way these things do. Slowly, with a lot of certified mail and hold music and careful language. My mother called me twice during this period. The first call was tearful and apologetic. The second call was less so. She said she hoped I understood the position I was putting the family in. I told her I hadn't put anyone in any position. My father did not call. Here's what I want to say about that, about my father's silence. He's not a man who deals with conflict directly. He processes things slowly and privately and usually arrives somewhere reasonable but never on your timeline. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he let my mother make a decision he was too conflict-averse to stop, and then he was too ashamed to address it, and shame has a way of calcifying into distance. I may be wrong, but it's the most charitable interpretation I can hold. And I've decided I need to be able to hold something charitable about him or I'll lose him entirely. The investigation took 11 weeks. At the end of it, the bank determined that the loan had been obtained fraudulently. The application had used my identifying information without authorization. The loan was removed from my credit file. My score recovered. The bank pursued the matter on their end, which involved my parents and documentation I was not privy to. My lawyer kept me informed of what was relevant to my situation. My parents were required to begin repaying the loan themselves. There were other consequences I'll leave vague out of a complicated mix of privacy and residual protectiveness that I know is not entirely rational. But the record was cleared. My name was cleared. What wasn't cleared was everything else. My mother and I didn't speak for 4 months. My father called in month 3, at 9 in the morning on a Sunday, which meant he had planned the call. And he said, "I'm sorry, Sloane, I'm genuinely sorry." He didn't elaborate, he didn't explain. He just said it, flatly and seriously, and I believed him, and I said thank you, and we talked for 11 minutes about nothing in particular, and then he said he had to go. It was not enough, but it was something. The conversation with my mother took longer to happen and was harder when it did. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop. Neutral ground, her suggestion, and she cried again, but differently this time. Less like the tears were for me and more like they were for herself, for the loss of whatever story she'd been telling about our family, about who we all were to each other. She said she had convinced herself I would eventually understand, that once things settled I would see they'd had no real option. I told her that there are always options, that I didn't know what else to do is not the same as there was nothing else to do. That calling a bank and saying we can't afford this venue, can we scale back, was an option. That having a smaller wedding was an option. That telling my brother and Tanya the budget had limits was an option. That calling me and saying we're in trouble and we need help was an option. And if I'd said no, that would have been my answer to live with, but it would have been my answer. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I wanted the wedding to be perfect for him." I understand that. I do. I'm not unfeeling. But perfection funded by theft isn't perfect. It's just expensive denial. We're not repaired. I want to be honest about that. My mother and I are in a place that I would describe as carefully cautious. We talk on the phone once a week or so. We exchange information. There is warmth in it sometimes, the residual warmth of people who were once much closer, who have a shared history that doesn't disappear just because something broke. But the shape of our relationship is different now. The trust is different. I can feel the difference every time I hang up, like a room where the furniture has been moved. Familiar, but not the same. My brother and I are more distant. Not hostile. He came to me eventually, in person, and said he was sorry, a longer apology, more specific, including the acknowledgement that the wedding he benefited from had been funded in a way that was wrong. I believe he meant it. I also believe he has moved on from it more completely than I have, which is the nature of these things. It's easier to move on from something done to someone else. We see each other at family gatherings. We are kind to each other. We will probably be fine eventually in a distant and functional way. My sister is still my person. She called me every week during the investigation. She drove to see me twice. She said on one of those drives, sitting in my apartment eating takeout, "You know none of this is about you being wrong, right? They did something wrong, you didn't." I've held on to that. Some days it's obvious and some days I still need to hear it. There's a detail I keep coming back to. When I first found the loan on my credit report, before I called anyone, before I knew anything, I sat on my couch and I looked at my succulent on the windowsill and I thought about how I'd been watering it wrong for months. I'd been over-watering it, actually. Succulents don't need much. They hold their own water. They're fine with less. I'd been trying to give it too much and it had been struggling because of it. I thought about that for a long time. The thing about being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who leaves home at 18 and asks for nothing and sends money back when she probably shouldn't, the thing is at some point someone in the family starts to see that reliability as a resource. Not maliciously maybe, not with full awareness, but it happens. The person who always handles things becomes the person whose name you put on a loan application when you are out of options and you've decided that their no isn't the final word. I closed that account. Not metaphorically. The account itself, once the fraud dispute was resolved, was addressed as part of the process. I changed the institutions where my financial information was held. I put alerts on my credit file. Practical things a lawyer and a fraud specialist, and honestly my own common sense told me to do. But I also did something else. I let myself grieve the version of my family I had wanted us to be. The one where my parents were the kind of people who would never. Where my brother's wedding was just a happy day with no shadow under it. Where my mother's tears were always for me instead of for herself. That family didn't exist. Maybe it never fully existed. But I had been invested in the idea of it, and the idea caused me something when it broke. I'm doing fine. I want to end on that because it's true and because I know how these stories go. People want to know you're okay, and I am. I have my apartment and my cat and my succulent, which is doing better now that I've stopped overwatering it. I have my sister. I have a credit report that is clean. I have a lawyer. I hope I never need to call again, but who I will not hesitate to call. And I have this story which I've turned over in my hands for a year and a half, tracing the edges of it, trying to understand the shape of it. Not because I'm still angry, I'm not mostly, but because I think stories like this deserve to be looked at clearly, without the softening that families put around their worst moments. Without the, we didn't know what else to do that makes theft sound like helplessness. They had options. They chose one that wasn't theirs to choose, and I chose to deal with it honestly, through the right channels, and to come out the other side with my name intact. That's the part I'm most proud of. Not the outcome, though I'm relieved by the outcome. The part where I sat at that kitchen table with the credit report in front of me, and I said plainly and without drama, I need you to tell me about this. No shouting, no threats, just the truth laid on the table, refusing to be managed away. That's what I've got. That's what they couldn't take from me. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, the way you do when you're driving somewhere familiar and your mind wanders. Actions produce outcomes. Choices close certain doors and open others. That's not a philosophy I read somewhere. It's just something I've watched play out, up close, in my own family. My parents made a choice. They decided that their discomfort, the embarrassment of a smaller wedding, the conversation they'd have to have with my brother, the admission that the budget had limits, was worse than taking something from me without asking. They weighed it, consciously or not, and they chose their comfort over my right to decide what happened with my own name and my own financial history. That choice had consequences they didn't anticipate, because I think they genuinely believed I would absorb it, that I would eventually understand, that the reliable daughter would, as she always had, find a way to make it okay. The thing about being reliable for a long time is that people stop asking and start assuming. That's not cruelty always. Sometimes it's just the slow erosion of someone's boundaries, because those boundaries were never loudly defended. I had spent years being the one who handled things, and somewhere along the way handling things became something that could be done on my behalf, without me. What I did. Filing the dispute, calling a lawyer, sitting down at that kitchen table with the credit report, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't anger in action. It was just me, finally insisting on the truth of the situation. Insisting that what happened had a real name and real consequences, and that I wasn't going to manage it away to spare everyone's feelings. That's the intelligence piece, I think. Knowing the difference between keeping peace and keeping quiet. They're not the same thing. For a long time I confused them. The resilience part came later. After the investigation closed. After my credit was cleared and the calls with my mother became careful and my brother and I became the polite, functional version of siblings we are now. Resilience isn't the dramatic moment where you stand up for yourself. It's the 6 months after, when you're still showing up to your life, going to work, watering your plant, eating cereal over the sink at 7 in the morning, while something in the background is slowly healing. It's not exciting, but it's real. My sister said something I've held on to. She said I was wrong about nothing. She didn't mean it as flattery. She meant it factually, the way you'd point out that the math checks out. And I've decided to believe her, not because it always feels true, but because the evidence supports it. Here's what I know. You can love people and still require them to be accountable. You can grieve the family you wanted and still function in the family you have. You can have your name taken from you and go through the slow, tedious, certified mail process of taking it back. None of it is clean. None of it resolves the way you wish it would. But your name is still yours at the end. And that matters more than I knew before any of this happened.